What happened was an insurance company had $250,000 embezzled. Pretty basic embezzlement. The accountant for the insurance company was just writing checks to himself. That guy's named Johnny. I get the case, go talk to the victims, get all the paperwork, get all the documents, kind of going through it all, and I'm kind of gearing up to talk to Johnny. And then I get called into the office of the organized crime guys, the Chicago Mafia squad. They close the door and they're like, we got an issue, Tom. This guy, Johnny, that you're investigating, he's a target of ours. Turned out Johnny was a bookmaker for the Chicago mob. So his mob bosses were putting pressure on him to collect from his deadbeat bettors, but his deadbeat bettors were himself. The FBI agents who were on the Mafia squad had this great idea. They're like, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna come with you. We're gonna bring Johnny in. We're gonna try and flip him. And we're gonna make him a deal.
So what does it take to be an FBI agent?
The FBI has a few requirements, and we like a diverse workforce. But in order to be an FBI agent, we want to see you have a college degree. And that college degree, an undergraduate degree is fine. A lot of people get master's degrees, but that's not necessary or required. The college degree should be in accounting, engineering, some kind of hard science like physics, chemistry, or biology, or computer science, right, is the other hot area right now. If you also happen to have a foreign language, one of the desirable foreign language, like one of the Chinese dialects, Arabic, Farsi, that would be super helpful as well. And then we don't hire people out of college, so we generally want to see a few years of work experience. 3 is usually optimal. But the average starting age of an agent is like 29, so you have a few years. But it's important that that postgraduate job be a job that involves complex problem solving. And if it is, then you could pretty much fly through the process. A lot of people make the mistake of majoring in criminal justice or criminology, thinking that's going to help. But that doesn't make you a competitive candidate. It just makes you a moron.
Why would you say that? Why does it not really kind of have any kind of competitive aspect into?
The FBI wants you to come to the table with some actual skills. They're going to teach you criminal justice. They're going to teach you criminology. That's why we have the FBI Academy in Quantico. But the idea that we're going to teach some kid in a classroom between the ages of 18 and 22 how to be an FBI agent with a criminal justice degree, all you're really going to end up doing is being a barista. There's nothing wrong with that, but there's no law enforcement agency in America that favors those degrees. But if a kid does make the mistake because they're 18 years old and didn't know what the world was like and gets a degree in criminal justice or criminology, what they can do is then become a cop and excel in that, or join the military. Excel there, or go to law school. And then once they get to their upper 20s, maybe even low 30s, then apply to become an FBI agent. By that point, their work experience may make them qualified.
And what would the personality of these candidates be too? Because you look at engineering candidates, friends that I had in college and stuff, some of them might be like, yeah, this guy could solve every problem in the world, but if I put him on, I wouldn't trust him on an FBI task force. So what would be some of the personalities or the, the social construction of that person, whether they're studying, accounting as yourself, or if they're studying engineering or criminal justice, whatever it might be?
FBI agents come from all personality types, right? So there's no one kind of bucket that makes an FBI agent. We got introverts, we got extroverts, but I think the common ground is that FBI agents should be able to speak to people, right? They should be good communicators. They should be good listeners. And they should also be very good writers, because for all the stuff you see on TV about the fun stuff FBI agents are doing, for every one of those days, you're spending a day in the office documenting what you did. Because if you can't write a good report that you're going to be held accountable for, then you're just worthless. And so writing skills, verbal skills, and listening skills, I would say the 3 soft skills beyond all the, whatever you're going to learn from college and your previous work experience.
Now, what does it take to make Agent Tom Simon?
Well, I was an accounting major. And so I was a boring major. And so when I was in high school, growing up in this area here in suburban Washington, D.C., I knew I wanted to be an FBI agent. And my mom was a realtor here. And so she sold a house to an FBI agent. And I got to talk to him and ask him what I should major in. And he said, law or accounting. And he said, and I go, what does that entail? And he goes, well, accounting's a 4-year degree. Law school would be some other 4-year degree plus 3 years of law school. And I hated school, right?
Don't we all?
Yeah, the idea of sitting in school for another 3 years waiting to live my dream was just too horrible to contemplate. So I majored in accounting, not because I had some passion for debits and credits, but because I thought, it's the quickest way into the FBI, which it was.
So what sparked that interest in the FBI initially versus, the other alphabet agencies?
Yeah,
CIA,
Reed, I got to tell you,
whatever
it was all the wrong reasons.
Uh-huh.
I was a bookish kid. I spent all my time reading like spy novels and cop novels and mystery novels and watching action movies. So I thought I would spend a ton of time like jumping off moving trains as an FBI agent. The career was extremely rewarding, but for very different reasons. And so I thought it would be like very, very action packed. And there are moments of action and excitement. But the more cerebral stuff is actually what I fell into, kind of solving crimes, particularly financial crimes.
Can you maybe diversify? A lot of people would think with the FBI or CIA, right, you watch American Dad,
Yeah.
or you watch, James Bond, you grow up reading books, whatever it might be. So in everyone's mind, these agencies are all around. I'm going to go bust the, head kingpin over in Russia, or I'm going to do this or that. Can you maybe explain, I guess, a deeper view into what the FBI is, the structuring, and why maybe necessarily there isn't just one part that's focused on national security. There's a lot of different avenues. What's up, guys? Quick pause in the action here to say that if you're enjoying the podcast thus far, do me a huge favor and leave the video a like and subscribe for more future content. Or if you're on Spotify or Apple Music, make sure to follow the show to not miss any future episodes and leave us a 5-star review. And with that, let's get back to the action.
That's a great question because FBI has sort of a two-headed animal, right? We have our criminal investigative side and then the national security side. And so the criminal investigative side is really the same job as a big city police detective, right? You're on a violent crime squad, you're on a crimes against children squad, you're on a white collar crime squad, and you're building a case or an organized crime squad against a group or an individual to try to show the rise to that burden of proof that the government needs to rise to. And so it's that's what people are familiar with. That's what you go to civics class and you learn about the criminal justice system. And so that's pretty much where most of my career was. There's an entire other side of the house for the FBI. That's the national security side. And their focus is really two-headed underneath that. There's the foreign counterintelligence side, I'll get to that, and the counterterrorism side. The counterterrorism side is trying to make sure that a terrorist attack does not occur on U.S. soil again before it actually happens. You're trying to prevent that terrorist attack. And then if there is an act of terrorism because the ball got through the goalie, then you have to investigate that. So that's one side of the national security side, and those are often intelligence investigations. Foreign counterintelligence is the idea of catching spies that are here in the U.S. or identifying them and monitoring their activities while they're here in the U.S. And so while the CIA is overseas being spies, the FBI here in the U.S. are the spy catchers.
So when was the moment where your mindset shifted from, I saw you say this on another podcast, jumping from trains and catching bad guys to going into more of the financial aspect? Was that a shift that happened in college once you started going down the accounting path? Or was that just kind of a more generalized, as you grew up, you realized that your inquisition towards kind of investigations is what really led you down that path?
Yeah. Shockingly, in my 26 years as an FBI agent, I never used a single day of my accounting education. So I think I'm still a little puzzled why the FBI was so insistent that we need to hire CPAs. And but I really like the idea of con artists. I think that was such a fascinating thing. Looking at movies like The Sting. I'm an older guy, so that's where I'm coming from, or any movie involving con artists who are trying to kind of sweet talk someone into separating them from their money with lies. I think fraud is super interesting, and so while I would have been perfectly happy if I was put onto like a violent fugitive squad as my first assignment, my supervisor, my training agent took me aside and said, we don't hire people like you, Tom, because you're fun to be around. We want you to investigate fraud and give that a try. And I fell in love with it. For 26 years, I fell in love with it.
So let's get into the career. You highlighted how you went to go study accounting, which for many probably wouldn't be the most exciting college career path.
No, it was miserable. Yeah. I hated every day of it. I mean, you like college, right? Because you're in college, there's pretty girls, you're throwing the frisbee, and all that. But my classes were mind-numbingly boring. But I was good at it. Accounting's like refrigerator repair, right? You majored in political science. You're learning ideas. You're writing papers. You're kind of marinating in deep thoughts. Learning accounting is like learning a trade. Whether you go to Dartmouth or whether you go to Clemson, you're learning the same stuff. And at the end of the day, you take a test as the CPA exam, and hopefully you pass that. And so I did. And so I learned it. It was good, but I'm not going to pretend that I was splitting atoms.
Did you feel a moment though where you were thinking around just finance in general, you're like, hey, I'm pretty good at this? Because for me in accounting, I don't know if I just never had like deep interest into it. I'd get my ass kicked on some accounting classes and
Yeah.
stuff. Was there a moment where it kind of hit you where you're like, this might be my path. This might be something I'm pretty good at.
No, it was always a means to an end. The idea of accounting being anything other than a stepping stone to the FBI was too horrible to contemplate. So I was putting all my eggs in that basket. Now I did some things to hedge my bets after I graduated because there was, I'll tell you, I got a job with a firm called KPMG,
I was going to dive into that.
biggest
yeah.
accounting firm in the world.
Yep.
You're familiar because you were a guy once or a
Mhm.
spinoff from that. And so the right when I graduated, accounting, the big firms were all opening forensic and investigative services practice, basically private investigative firms under the accounting firm doing white collar crime investigations on behalf of clients. And so I got my foot in the door there.
So what triggered a lot of them to move in that direction? Because I know you highlighted this, which maybe you can dive into this a little bit as well, how the SNL scandal of the 80s and 90s led to the FBI actually taking these type of crimes a little bit more seriously, launching, what's the department I have? The CCRSB listed down. Was there a similar aspect that kind of led to a lot of companies taking this seriously, or was it just about time to kind of continue to
The
expand?
truth, Canada had been doing it for a while. And so the KPMG version in Canada was KPMG, Pete Marwick Thorne at the end of the day, some historical firm that bought another firm type of thing. And they found that the partners there were making a ton of money doing fraud investigations. And so they're always looking for new revenue streams in these big accounting firms. And they knew the books of the company. They know their clients inside and out. And so it just made perfect sense for them, for the partners to begin branching off and doing that here in the US and kind of starting this new industry of for-profit fraud investigations. Because your local private investigator on the street is often not equipped to handle a giant kind of Enron size case.
Mm-hmm. So originally you went to KPMG for just crunching the numbers.
Age 22, right? So I was doing audit, and again, you like it, right? You're locked in a room with other 22, 23-year-olds. You're having the time of your life. You're working like 16, 17-hour days.
Pretty well too.
The pay was fine. Yeah, I was in Chicago. I was had an apartment in the shadow of Wrigley Field. Yeah, it was good. It was a good life, but the work itself was just so mind-numbingly horrible. And I don't think I was good at it. I think I'd be a better auditor now, understanding why audits are important and kind of why testing the veracity of a company's financial statements is so important. But at age 22, 23, even with the degree, I don't think I had a good understanding of that. And so then I heard about they hired this guy who was an ex-federal agent to kind of lead up their forensic and investigative services practice. And so I basically camped out at his office and introduced myself. I had been an FBI intern. I was trying to leverage that, even though I didn't learn anything of use to him. And I just told him, listen, I want to be an FBI agent someday. And I go, but until then, I'd like to work for you. And so finally he began putting me on gigs, and I transferred over to their forensic and investigative services practice.
So what were some of those early gigs?
Yeah. We were hired. Sears was a big Chicago company, and they had a licensee relationship with a company that was selling, furnishing, and installing siding, like aluminum siding and vinyl siding on the side of houses. And Sears got nervous that the vinyl siding company was engaging in predatory business practices, like ripping people off, selling them siding that they didn't need, or selling them siding by telling them it's going to scare the snakes away from the houses and stuff like that.
That's awesome.
So they wanted us to go kind of like audit, basically for fraud, the process of this licensee that was selling under Sears's name. And so we discovered all sorts of bad stuff they were doing. And then we had another company in Cincinnati that was just cooking the books. It was a publicly traded company that was putting sales on the books that just didn't exist. And so I spent a couple months in Cincinnati working that gig and interviewing people, developing informants inside the company, talking to former employees who knew what was happening and left, and kind of building that out. The problem with the cases, though, well, first of all, it was a hedge for me, because if I didn't get into the FBI, I could do that forever, make a heck of a lot more money, and do what I'm basically doing now. Mm-hmm. But for me, it was a bit unsatisfying because my investigations would culminate in a report to a board of directors, right? Who often wasn't super excited about like bringing this to the FBI and having their employees locked up and having their name in the Wall Street Journal. And so there was something missing there for me.
The actual solution to the
actual consequences, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, someone gets caught embezzling from a local insurance company, I'll investigate it back then, and they would get canned. but it wasn't a job that they particularly liked to begin with, and so they weren't like bent out of shape about it. The company didn't want to prosecute because they didn't want their name in the Chicago Tribune, and so the cases sort of went nowhere quite often.
Yeah, I could 100% see that. And
Right now, keep in mind, I'm at this 23-year-old kid who thinks he's going to be in the Marvel's Avengers. Right? I have this thirst for justice, and I'm more pragmatic about it now. But back then, I just wanted to lock people up. The idea of anyone doing anything like stealing from your employer or ripping off little old ladies and not facing actual consequences by breaking rocks in the hot sun in an orange jumpsuit made me insane.
And so I guess with that pipeline, because, now we'll get to this plenty in the end of the podcast, is, you're running your own firm. And the idea, one of the biggest aspects that you have there is you do have a pretty good pipeline connection with the FBI. Mm-hmm. So when you develop these cases, you can't make the arrest anymore, but you can point it the direction and say, you got to look at this. Was there ever instances of people wanting to do that as well, where, not to say a whistleblower, but, you guys do all this research, you see, some asshole who's stealing $10 million from, the local church's, pension fund or whatever it might be, and, you're not seeing any justice. Was there any inklings either from you or people that you maybe worked with where they're like, we got to do something about this?
I think, it was all very client-based, right? And so if the client wanted to see a public hanging, we could definitely bring this to the FBI. That Cook in the Books case in Cincinnati, the FBI was running a parallel investigation, but they were way slower than us because we had access to all the books and records of the company. We were inside the company. In fact, by design, the company and the board of directors wanted us to find out what was going on so they could sort of control the message that was going out to the FBI. But if the client wanted us to kind of bring a referral to the FBI, that boss of mine who was a former federal agent was better connected in the world than I was. I mean, the FBI didn't want to hear from a 23-year-old kid.
I promise I'm breaking down the biggest case right now.
Soon I'll be working with you, but right now I want to just tell you about this big investigation I did. Yeah, so no, I was also creating the forensic practice was tied with their litigation services practice. So I was writing and doing the number crunching for expert witness testimony that our partners would do. You ever heard of ice beer?
Yeah.
So the early days of ice beer was invented by a company called Labatt's in Canada. And then like Bud Light and Bud in Budweiser in St. Louis just stole it. They just stole the idea. And so Labatt's was suing Budweiser. And so I was creating the expert witness testimony to try to compute what the damages were for how much money is Budweiser kind of stealing this idea and muscling Labatt's out of the way going to cost Labatt's. So I'm basically getting my partner who has gray hair and looks more, I look like a pimply kid. No one's going to put me on the stand as an expert witness. I was getting him into fighting shape so he could take the stand and explain what the damages were to the jury. But then we got our clock cleaned in court because what happened is Budweiser countersues in the state of Missouri. If there's two lawsuits again, basically the law in Missouri says that if one of the parties of a lawsuit is in Missouri, that trial needs to take place in Missouri. So the trial gets moved to St. Louis. So we're the giant employer there is Anheuser-Busch. And so the idea that we were going to walk into that case and somehow win it being, Labatt's out of Canada versus
a jury of your peers
versus Budweiser in St. Louis, it was like Don Quixote. There was no way we were going to win that case. And so, but the firm saw it differently. We gave our client what they wanted, and we presented the case honestly, in the best way we could. And so, but anyway, I got off track.
Yeah, no. I mean, it's really interesting hearing those cases too, because there's so much, and we'll dive into it a little bit later, but litigation in itself is just its own ball game. Like whether you bring it through FBI, I mean, that's something that
it's so costly. Yeah. Like the idea, like this. The amount of money being spent on these two beer companies just duking it out was just, and I see it now in divorce cases. The idea that these husbands and wives are hiring these expensive lawyers and private investigators to like fight it out and just depleting the resources of the family about who's going to get an extra buck here or there. I always try to tell my clients, I said, the juice may not be worth the squeeze here. I'm happy to take your money, but you need to think long and hard about whether it just makes sense to wave the white flag, take half of what you can get, and move on.
Yeah, I hear that a lot. There's like retaliation. I always make the joke that, if I get married, I'm going to have a prenup that I get to keep the dog no matter what. Cause like I hear some crazy stories of people trying to be forceful, taking stuff that they know has like personal value.
Yeah.
And, they'll bring in a team, you're working on it, trying to find, this or that. And it's just like, man, people get so blinded and then they finish out. And like you're saying, it's like, well, now I have no money.
Well, yeah, there's that. You're splitting, exactly. The lawyers are getting rich, right? They're putting an pool in the back of their house, and the families are going to be eating wet newspaper with the kids who are now sharing custody with two broke parents.
So, interesting question with this. So, again, I'm not within any agency groups, but from my understanding is I know the NSA really looks to recruit on a lot of different, cybersecurity teams, especially at some of the big firms. If you look at like Meta, Google, whatever it might be. Was there a way maybe the FBI was looking at, these big accounting firms forming these type of groups and saying like, this is a perfect pipeline that we kind of want to, we want to really formulate so we can be able to bring in, because, as you highlight, a lot of these examples and the developments you're getting from it really pay dividends later on.
Right. I don't think, I would love to say that the FBI was so well organized that they would have the ear of the big, when I was there, the big six, but now probably the big 3 or 4 accounting firms to whisper in their ear and say, launch these practices so we can have these recruits coming our way. I just don't think that was the case. These firms are driven by billing, as they should be. And the idea that there's a service that clients need, big corporate clients, and that they could provide that service in a quality way was really what drove it. Now, from a selfish perspective, it gave me a real leg up on other applicants who were maybe coming out of KPMG or Ernst & Young from their auditing practices, because I could speak the language of fraud and investigation during my interview process with the FBI. So I think it helped me a lot, but I don't think there was some like puppet master at the Department of Justice who was kind of making all this happen. I would love to think the government was that organized, but they're just not.
Yeah. Now that I think about it, yeah, you're probably, it's a good point. Yeah. So you mentioned informants, and I guess at the top line with the question, what does it take to be Agent Tom Simon? You were very well known, within industry when you were working at the FBI as being the guy that can kind of lock down the cases, that I can get, the person to admit whatever might happen. What were the foundational moments here where you're building up, these rapport, learning how to work and operate in this type of, environment? Obviously, coming from accounting in college, they don't teach you how to do that. So what were some of the early, I guess, opportunities and learning experiences that kind of led you to be able to hone that craft? So when you got to the FBI, you became that guy.
They taught us at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia. I went there for 16 weeks. It's kind of like our version of Police Academy. And you live there on campus. And one of the classes is a communication class. And so they're teaching you kind of the benign stuff like how to write reports in the FBI style, but they're also teaching you interview and interrogation techniques. And there was something about my interrogation class that just clicked with me that, oh my God, this is amazing. I can get people to tell me things if I use these tricks that are against their self-interest and very much in my interest as the investigator, with the goal toward getting to the truth, right? Getting a false confession doesn't help them. It doesn't help me. It doesn't solve a case. And so that clicked with me. And then I had an opportunity pretty early in my career to go to a CIA interrogation school where they were using very similar methods. And so I did that, and that was like over several days with like breakout groups and role playing.
Is that common practice for FBI?
No, it was a selection thing, and I put in for it and got it. No one was more surprised than me, and so then you're like this guy. It's like jujitsu. Like then you're this guy with this set of tricks, right?
Yeah.
And you're not like you want to go to a bar and choke someone out if you know jujitsu. I want to get into a case and actually interrogate someone. At the time, I was on a bank fraud squad, and so I had just a ton of cases, like a massive amount of cases, small cases.
This is when you were in the FBI, right?
Yeah, the FBI, right? So I now have my interrogation skills from being taught by both the FBI and the CIA how to do it, and I was in a few interrogations as kind of the second chair with some older agents who knew what they were doing, and it was kind of amazing to watch them break people down psychologically and get those people to tell you the truth. And so I began using those tricks, for lack of a better word, those methods to get people to tell me the truth in my bank fraud cases. And these were like, bank managers who were embezzling money, or people involved with check fraud or check kiting. And so I found that if I could get the confession, it fast tracks the case with the prosecutor's office. They like a case that they're not going to really have to prove up in court in a trial, that's going to be a sure thing for a plea, because when the defense attorney finally lands on their desk, they're going to say, oh great, he signed a confession to Agent Simon. The confession wasn't coerced, and it was the truth. And so then the defense attorney is like, well, he's been checkmated, and so then it's time to negotiate the plea deal. And I like that because I was able to cycle through more cases, because trials are really, really
not fun.
Well, it's not that they're not fun. It's not a great use of time, right? Because it takes me out of the game for a few weeks during the course of the trial, where I could be investigating and making other cases. And so I found throughout my career that my ability to get that confession would supercharge my cases. And it became a resource to other agents. If they had a big case, they would call upon me to do the interrogation.
I was going to say, that's awesome. That's cool. It's got to be fun to be known at the guy at the FBI that's like, well, if you need a confession, that's your guy.
Well, it was nice, and it gave me a front seat to history with a lot of big cases.
So I do want to keep diving a little bit more into that, but I want to make sure that we're kind of keeping everything on like a unison timeline. So from KPMG, you had the opportunity then to move to the FBI and go to Chicago, which is led into what we were just talking about. So can you maybe highlight, when was that opportunity to flip, and why did you decide to pull the trigger when you did?
Every now and then there's windows of time that often stretch for years where the FBI has a hiring freeze. That usually has something to do with Congress and whether Congress has given us enough money to hire new agents. There was a hiring freeze at the FBI from 1992 to 1995, and which was fine with me because I wasn't old enough to be an FBI agent.
What was the reasoning behind the freeze at that period? Was it just general political discourse?
Yeah, it has to be. I was sort of oblivious to that because I wasn't really into politics, but I would assume that some party was in charge and was starving out the FBI because they had
they wanted money to go here,
some reason to do so. Yeah, and or maybe they were rewriting. I know during that window of time they were revamping the entire application process, so the FBI used that downtime wisely. And then I received word from someone, I can't remember who, that the FBI was hiring again at in late 94, early 95. And I was one of the first people to put my application in. And so I went through the entire application process, which we could talk about if you want, and ended up getting hired.
Let's dive into the application process. I guess, what does the application process look like? And what is the kind of normal acceptance rate, deny rate, and overall, like what are kind of some of the base qualifications people will be looking at?
Right. So it begins with Congress allotting a certain number of seats at Quantico for the year. So let's say they fund 2,000 new agents at Quantico for the year 2024. And so then the FBI Academy needs to ramp up their hiring process and make sure that there's instructors and make sure there's seats at the Academy to get those 2,000 people through for that year. Because once it's use it or lose it, right? Once that year is up in its fiscal year for the government, then that money goes away if you don't use it. So it's very important to the FBI to get those bodies in the door. And so that begins with an intelligence test called the Phase 1 test. And so they just fill classroom after classroom of people with very little screening. You got a college degree, you got some work experience, you could take that Phase 1 test. You sit down, you take the test. It's basic intelligence test, very similar to the LSAT. And then about half the people pass and about half the people fail. And
I can see that with the LSAT, so I can...
Yeah. So you see, but of those 50%, then they begin taking a look at them. Who are the lawyers? Who are the accountants? Who are the engineers? Who are the computer scientists? And they give those people an opportunity to go to a meet and greet interview, which is sort of a one-on-one interview with an FBI agent, where they're reviewing your resume and saying, okay, this person, maybe they have a computer science degree, but they've been working as a bartender for a few years, are they really ready for this job? And the agents are, and I did that for years, the agents are supposed to be very candid with the applicant, telling them, you really need a couple of years of work experience in a technical field, or there's no way you're going to make it through the process. From the people who pass that meet and greet, there's no percentage there. Then they go to, I think next now is a physical fitness test. Okay. And that physical fitness test, they're bringing everybody to like a track at like a high school at like 6 a.m. or whatever. And they're testing your ability to run 1.5 miles with the time.
What time?
Oh, I used to know this, Reed. You should be running about 8-minute miles.
Okay.
Right. It's nothing, we're not talking full Kenyan, but we're talking, faster than I could run it now. Yeah. And a certain number of push-ups, you should be up in the 20 to 30 range, a certain number of sit-ups in 1 minute, get yourself in the 40s or 50s as far as sit-ups you can complete in 1 minute, and then a 300-meter sprint. But the catch is that the events are back to back to back to back. There's like very little rest between them. And so, and right now, and again, I don't know if I blame the internet or video games or junk food or whatever, the pass rate for that is insanely low. When I went through, you would be just ashamed to show up and fail. So you would don't show up if you got a knee injury or if you haven't been running and training. Now it seems like the applicants are showing up with absolutely zero planning, just kind of hoping that like the Holy Spirit's going to come down from heaven and give them the ability to do 30 push-ups. Yeah. And so people are failing that left and right. And then, we're not going to spend the money to fly you to the panel interview, which is the next step if you can't pass that physical fitness test.
Why do you think that's really interesting? Because you feel like somebody that's going in, like this is one of my favorite things about you. Immediately when I saw you, scrolling through it, like I said, I followed you on my personal account for like a long while. And when I saw you, I was like, okay, this person's very, like, you just come off driven. You come off like, I have ambition. This is what I want to do. And I would feel like that's pretty commonplace for most people that are interested in going, FBI, CIA. And so I feel like fitness would just be part of that as well. It's like, if I got to get in shape, I got to get in shape. So like, what do you think the hindrance is with people kind of coming into the application process? And
that's the $1 million question, right? Mm-hmm. Like, the old grouches at the office are like blaming the millennials or Gen Z. But that's just that, but every generation blames the generation 2 generations down from them. And I don't know. I don't know if the people are just delusional. I don't know if people are just exercising less. Mm-hmm. I would think, I have no idea. I don't know if it's diet. I have no idea. But it's just this weird phenomenon where people are showing up to the FBI physical fitness test without the ability to pass that physical fitness test. This isn't a pop quiz, Reed, right? Why aren't you doing this with your girlfriend at the high school the week before to make sure you can pass it? And I mean, there's an FBI physical fitness app that'll teach you how to get in shape for this, how to like build your muscles so you can do enough push-ups and sit-ups. I mean, it's obvious stuff for folks who are athletes, but for these computer scientists, maybe they weren't athletes growing up, but they can certainly get in that good a shape. We're not talking about like clean and jerks, right?
Yeah.
And these are
an 8-minute miles. You should be able to do an 8-minute mile, just even if you're just a random Joe.
For a kid in his 20s, certainly, right?
Well, I'm saying if you're applying early FBI, you should, an 8-minute mile should not even be like out of the question. That should be,
and it's also for a mile and a half, right? We're not running 26 miles. I mean. I will say in the defense of those people, I've caught a lot of criminals in my lifetime. I've never caught any of them by running, but I understand the rationale, right? What we don't want you to do is get to the academy and like you to be embarrassed. And, and so I don't know. I have, trust me, the physical fitness guys, and that's sort of my crew at the FBI. They sit around wondering what's wrong too, what's happening. And it's not there's always been people who can't pass, but they usually have the common sense to not show up. The idea of showing up to a physical fitness test that you're not for the job you want and then failing miserably because you haven't prepared at all is just head scratching. I don't get it.
Yeah. I mean, I would find that so frustrating and sad as leadership.
It's embarrassing.
Where the physical part's the part that we're getting all these great applicants. Yeah. This guy has a 164 IQ and, did all this. Can't do 10 push-ups though, so we're gonna have to cut him. It's like, man, that sucks. That's
right. I think what actually happens is they end up getting recycled. The recruiter will reach out for them and say, hey, get yourself in shape. If it takes 6 months, if it takes a year, we like you. You pass the first 2 phases, right? The intelligence test and the meet and greet. You got a fantastic resume. Get yourself in shape and let me know when you want to retake the test. So a lot of the people who are at those tests are retaking it. There may be some cap on the amount of times you can take it. Yeah. And I don't know what that is. Maybe it's 2 or 3. And so, but people are washing out all the time or just sort of like saying, oh, well, I'll never be able to do that many sit-ups. And so.
So that stems to my second question I was going to follow up with too, kind of at the beginning of this application process. So are there individuals that are hand selected? I've heard this with CIA where you'll get reached out to.
No, I mean, the FBI does recruiting, but they're not in it. It's not like the TV where you wake up in the morning as like a 17-year-old kid and there's like 2 guys in suits standing at the foot of your bed saying like, you've been selected, Tom. Wouldn't that be great? And but now it's the recruiting is done in we'll have recruiting events at colleges and where everybody will think they're going to an FBI interview, but you're just going to be in a room full of people with an FBI agent, the recruiter kind of doing a presentation, explaining what I'm playing now and telling them, exactly how to apply. And that's the way we try to also bring minorities into the FBI, because our minority recruiting is still a problem. We want to make the FBI look more like America. And so there'll be recruiting events at, women's colleges, recruiting events at traditional African American schools and stuff like that, to try to not, because there's no discount for a black person or a woman or a minority to get into the FBI. Everyone still has to pass all the same things with the same scores, but the trick is to try to juice those applications to get more people from different backgrounds to apply. And that's done through that recruiting process, which is almost always done at the university level. Sometimes the FBI will show up at job fairs and set up like a little booth there and try to, hand out little pamphlets, but it's the same for everybody. I mean, you basically go to FBIjobs.gov and you sign up to take the test. And if you have a college degree and then some work experience, you go take the test. And so, like I said, I wish there was that scene in the movie where where they would send me out to go, like, find some really promising 12-year-old kid, but that just doesn't happen.
So if somebody failed that physical fitness portion, so if they come back next year, are they starting from zero?
No, I mean, you've passed your phase 1 test. You kind of keep that forever.
Okay.
The meet and greet is really just reviewing your resume and saying, is this a person who's going to fit those requirements? And then that's usually a yes. And so no. So if you fail the physical fitness test, you just come back to take the physical fitness test once you get fit.
Okay. So we finished out the physical fitness test. We got Time Simon just kicking ass out there.
Hardly, but I mean, I think like the CPA exam, I probably passed with the bare minimum. I was no athletic monster, and I'm still not a runner, but you pass. And so then what happens is you're placed into a pool of people who have made it that far, and you were chosen to go to the phase 2 applicant interview. And what that is, they put you on an airplane and you fly out and you are interviewed for about an hour by 3 agents, kind of focusing on stories in your life. Tell me about a time where you had to plan a big project. Tell me about a time where you had to, exercise leadership. Tell me about a time where you had to, use your interpersonal skills to kind of bring a group together. And you tell stories from your life. And that's where about half the people pass that and half the people fail. There's also a written test there, like an essay test, to make sure you can read and write in proper English.
Is there preparation for that? Like for when I was doing, private equity investment banking, there's so much stuff online where you can go in, you can see the questions and stuff. Yeah. Is there like a BI prep?
Here's what I'll say about that. I've been sworn to secrecy, so I can't tell you the questions, but what I can tell you is that the questions are all, and they tell you this online, are all geared toward the FBI's kind of critical skills and which involve leadership and organizational abilities. And so if you were to go through the FBI's kind of 7 core competencies and get 2 or 3 stories from your life that kind of speak to those core competencies, that are true stories about stuff that's actually happened to you, and you need to explain the situation, tell us what you did in that situation and how it turned out. And you're going to be doing about 15 stories over the course of an hour. And so make sure your story doesn't go on for 20 minutes like mine tend to do. Then you're probably going to be just fine. So it's more reflection, but I also think practicing telling a story, into your iPhone, into the mirror, to your girlfriend or boyfriend, it goes a long way. And you could tell the people who are well rehearsed and practiced and have good life experiences.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like that would be something that, whether you're an introvert, an extrovert, you have to be able to almost turn that on, like the people pleasing ability. Is that something that they're looking for too? Like, I feel like, and I guess there's always backroom jobs as whatever it might be, but the ability to hold a conversation and really kind of come off as like, whether you're introverted, come off as extroverted, come off as,
Well, see, I disagree. I think maybe we have different definitions of introverted and extroverted, right? I think an introvert and extrovert should both be able to have an intelligent conversation with someone and be able to give and take. The extrovert just finds that incredibly recharging. The introvert finds that incredibly draining. Well,
so I guess plugging in at it a little bit more, I consider myself an introvert in a lot of ways where I really like my own company, but for conversations like this or, when I'm with you, I can turn it on and energize myself and really be able to, have these type of long form conversations, whatever it might be. I know people that are introverts that they just couldn't do it. And so I'm curious, is that something that
but again, I think you're getting to my point. You're still an introvert, yet you're able to kind of rise to the occasion and have an intelligent conversation with give and take and personality and all that with somebody. at the end of our multiple hour conversation here, you may feel drained. And whereas me as perhaps a natural extrovert, I'm going to be like ready to go out to a bar and like talk to somebody, right? Man, this is great. I had
go
this
hit downtown
fantastic
DC.
conversation with Reed. I'm on a roll. This is, and so I
Yeah.
think it's really kind of what energizes you and what interests you and what's within your comfort zone.
Interesting. So you're going on throughout this process. I love asking this question about, people that go through that. I had a DEA agent on last week, and he had a kind of a similar type of profile where he was doing this job, and ended up jumping into his dream, busting drug dealers.
Yeah.
You're going through this process, which is the interview for your dream job, for the opportunity to, really make the career that, and I've seen the way you talk about it's amazing. Just like how proud you are. I can really tell that you've embraced it. What's your psychology going through this whole situation? Is there nerves? Is there a feeling of this is what it's meant to be? This is why I'm here. Like
total nerves, total panic, right? Because I had placed all my eggs in one basket, right? All my life. I wanted to be, since I was a kid, I wanted to be anything other than an FBI agent. So the idea of failing and not even getting that job and needing to face everyone in my life and or even face myself in the mirror and ask myself, what are you going to do now? What's going to be the goal in your life now? And we can talk about it later, but when I got the job, this sort of existential crisis I had because I had achieved my one life goal of being an FBI agent. And so yeah, absolute panic every step of the way, but also that panic motivated me to make sure I was prepared, to make sure I could run that 1.5 miles. There was no way I wasn't going to, I would have done it on bloody stumps because I needed to do it because this was my life's dream. And, the interviews, I remember running around Lincoln Park in Chicago with my girlfriend, practicing my stories as we were in kind of going through it and kind of fine tuning the stories from my life. And I was 24, 25 years old at the time. So it wasn't like I had these fantastic stories from my life. And so I was trying to, put my best foot forward every step of the way.
What would be your advice to somebody in a similar situation, whether that be going for the FBI or they might be applying for their dream job at an investment bank or at Lululemon, who knows? But there's a lot of us deal with that type of anxiety, that type of nerves. And usually people that can do profound things have kind of a mindset or something that they say, something that they do that kind of keeps them driving through. So what was your kind of go-to during that moment?
For me, it's funny. I had a sign on my mirror every morning in my bedroom that said FBI by 95. I put that on my mirror in 1990. Awesome. And so every day for 5 years, when I would comb my stupid hair in the mirror, I saw the sign that said FBI by 95. And I wanted to make sure that every decision I made in my life was geared toward achieving that goal, whether it was getting in shape, whether it was choosing to not use drugs, whether it was choosing to, for me, it was not use alcohol, but for other people, it would be just don't do anything stupid when you're, when you're alcohol, whether it's, not drive, basically driving the speed limit or a few miles an hour above when it would be super easy, just the stuff out there that's going to get you in trouble and going to like derail you. And staying in shape, exercising. And so having that goal in mind, and for me, a visual representation of that goal meant the world to me. And it kind of kept me focused. Even, again, I hated accounting school, right? But every day, I would look in the mirror and see this goal that I had and know that even though sociology or political science would have been way more interesting to me and way more in keeping with my personality, I knew that would derail my plans to become an FBI agent. And so I stayed focused. I grinded it out because the reward for me was tremendous.
Can you remember a moment that would be your closest to where you almost failed that dream?
Accounting was just grinding me down. I hated it so much, going to a school for accounting. I found it so utterly boring. And I was taking as many sociology classes as I could because I love sociology. And we had these charismatic professors at Clemson who were like stand-up comics. And I just fell in love with it. And so I remember calling my mom at some point and saying, I'm really thinking about sociology. It would be such a cool major. And she's like, well, if that's what you want to do, do it. But you will be sacrificing the goal that you've set. The reason you went into accounting was because you have a goal. You really need to recalibrate your goals. And that kind of snapped me back.
That's pretty amazing. Yeah, to be able to kind of, especially now looking back on it, that has to be kind of a holy shit moment where you're just like, thank God I pushed through.
Yeah, 4 years of college, majoring in something that I didn't find particularly interesting was a spit in the ocean compared to this 26-year career and the career I have now, which is totally worth it.
Yeah,
So,
and I feel like young kids too. I mean, when you're that age in college, it's so easy to be like, man, let me just pick up. You know,
well, it's like being a soldier, right? Like, if someone had dreamt of serving the military as a soldier, becoming a pilot, and then you tap out because you don't like boot camp, boot camp's the price you pay to have this fantastic life that you've dreamt about having. For me, accounting school was that.
Yeah, accounting is definitely boot camp.
It sucks. I'm not glamorizing it. I mean, you're learning a good trade you'll never want for work, but again, and some people had a passion for it. I mean, all my friends who were accounting majors are probably still doing it, and they seem to dig it. And so there's no shade on the accountants, but it just wasn't for me.
Yeah, no, and like you said, the idea of the justice behind, you're not necessarily going to get that with accounting, but it means to end. A lot of times, you kind of reach that dream. You got to go through hardship. And, for a lot of folks just don't get that a lot of times. And so I think it's awesome to kind of hear that that's the struggle there because, it inspires people. They're like, man, I might be going through a shitty couple of years, but at least, I know that keep working, I can actually get to that dream instead of quitting now. Which is,
right. And now there's other options. I'm not saying that everyone has to major in accounting, right? I mean, computer science or engineering or biology or physics. I mean, there's probably more majors now that the FBI would deem to be competitive. But in the old days, it's pretty much accounting and law, or you had to have a pretty distinguished law enforcement or military career.
So you're wrapping up there with the second session. So you're on the plane heading out.
The phase 2 interview?
Yes. Yeah. What's the mindset going to that? Because now you're
terror because I got to meet all the other guys who were going with me, right? I did my phase 2 interview in Cleveland. And so they put like a bunch of us from Chicago on a plane together to Cleveland. And these guys were super older than me and way more accomplished.
Can you highlight? You were very young going into
I was I was 25 when I went into the academy. So I was probably 24 when I was going through the application process. And that made me so young. I mean, there was a guy, a friend of mine, he's a private investigator now in Chicago. Pablo Araya is his name. And he was well into his 30s. He'd been like a Marine helicopter pilot and just a super accomplished guy, big guy in business. There's a prosecutor there named John. And so we were all going through this process together. And I was just this measly CPA, like pimply faced kid at age 24. And so I was just terrified. But the good news is that everyone who passes. If 100% of the people pass, 100% of the people move to that next step of the application process. It's not a quota system. And so, actually the people that I was on that airplane with, I know many of them to this very day and we're in touch.
Was there ever a level of imposter syndrome too, being that young and being kind of around these kind of?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Reed. I knew in my heart I could be an FBI agent. I just didn't know how it would come off to someone else. I'm good at stepping into someone else's shoes and saying like, how's this guy coming off? And so it wasn't that I felt like I didn't deserve the job. I felt like there's no way I'm going to be able to convince anyone that I deserve this job because my resume was thin. I'd only been out of college for 3 years.
Yeah, it's interesting because imposter syndrome is funny too, because usually the people that have it are the people that shouldn't have it. You're what you're highlighting there, you're a perfect example of what the FBI would be looking for. I feel like recruiting young isn't always the worst thing, especially with the experience you had. But imposter syndrome in itself, a lot of times you hear the people that have it, but maybe be somebody that's like, they're out of the ordinary, but there's a reason they're out of the ordinary. Yeah. And it's because they have unique qualifications that actually make them worthwhile. But when you're out of the ordinary, you feel out of the ordinary. So you have imposter syndrome. So wrapping up there, so you finish up in Cleveland. Yeah. And is it good to go there?
Well, you get your word like a week later that you passed. And then that's sort of at that point, you've accomplished everything you need to do. And then it's just, then you take a polygraph test was my next step. And they're testing to make sure you told the truth on your application and that you're not a spy and that you're in compliance with the drug policy. The polygraph sucks being on the receiving end of it because I had to do that every 5 years throughout my whole career to make sure I hadn't become a spy. But walking into it that you're not a spy.
Yeah.
Right. And so I wasn't particularly worried.
So they still use polygraph. Isn't that proven to be pretty unreliable?
I hear that all the time. I don't know what to tell you. I'm not an expert. I'm not a polygrapher. It's not my thing, but I've been hooked up to a polygraph machine every 5 years of my adult life. And And there's times where they say, you're a little nervous about this issue involving your overseas travel. I'll be like, I don't know what to tell you. Eventually, I passed. During the course of the polygraph, I know from my friends who are polygraphers that people fail all the time on the drug question, and then when they turn off the polygraph and talk to them, most of those people end up admitting, I have violated the FBI drug policy, and I did use marijuana just once, 6 months ago, and all that. And so, I don't know if people are failing I don't know if a lot of people who have lied on their application, used drugs against the FBI's policy, or are spies are sailing through the process, which would mean the polygraph is nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
I also don't know if there's a lot of people who are getting bounced from the process who did nothing wrong. I just don't, because I'm not a polygrapher, so I've never been on that side of the door. I don't think the polygraph is ready for prime time in criminal courts at all, but as a applicant screening tool, it seems to work pretty well for the FBI.
Yeah, it makes sense because it does measure, like, there's levels of nerves, I'm sure, that it measures. I'm not by any way professional in this, but you're going to be somewhat nervous. But if you're actually doing it,
they account for that, though, right? So the whole thing's calibrated in such a way, and honestly, the less one knows about the polygraph going in, the better you're going to do. Mm-hmm. And so, like, the worst thing someone would do would be to sit up all night reading like how to beat a polygraph, because you're just going to screw that up. I would also argue that our polygraphers for the FBI go to school for like 6 months, and it's basically like a biology degree, and they're practicing and learning, and it's an insanely difficult program, where as opposed to maybe some other people who decide to pick it up on their own or getting like a certificate course from the local community college. Mm. And so I could see that a lot of the bad stuff involving polygraphs involve people who are just untrained using it and producing terrible results as a result of a poor training.
Yeah, like overreading the measurements.
But the last thing I want your viewers to do is think that I'm here like championing the polygraph. If it went away tomorrow, I'd be fine with that. I have no idea what the data is. And I know that the studies that have gone are all pretty negative on the polygraph. And the idea of anyone sitting in prison as a result of a polygraph would be too horrible to contemplate.
Yeah, and I get the differences of using it for FBI and like a job case and with somebody that's well trained on it versus what you're saying, using it in court for something that if you're accused of a crime and you didn't commit it, you're still going to come off like you committed that crime because you know what's on the table.
I would be furious if they did away with the polygraph, only because I had to endure it so many times as an agent. The next generation needs to suffer like
it's
I
like
did.
hazing,
Right? Yeah. Like and as someone who grew up Catholic, you're just kind of saddled with guilt all the time. Yeah. It was always I hated it.
So if somebody on that polygraph test failed, is it one of those things where? Probably not, but is it one of those things where they'd rather you, if they said, have you ever used drugs? At that point, if you kind of admit and say, look, there was one time, or what you're saying, like people on hook, and then they ask them, like, is it one of those things that they want you to tell the truth while they're doing the test?
Yeah, you're pre-interviewed, right? So you and the polygrapher are kind of deciding, or having a conversation off the box, deciding what your answers are going to be once you're on the box. And so that's the time to have the discussion with the polygrapher, who's an agent, and explain to them kind of what's on your mind, what happened. The FBI drug policy, let's be clear on what that is. It's cannot have sold illegal drugs ever in your life. That's a disqualifier. You cannot and you can't have used marijuana for 1 year up until the day of that test. And then you can't use anything heavier than marijuana, which is pretty much every other illegal drug, for 10 years prior to the test, right? So if you use cocaine at like a college party like 9 years ago, you're going to fail that polygraph. Mm-hmm. And but if you were a kid who smoked weed in college, no matter how many times, and it's been over a year, no problem.
But if you're honest going into it at that point, is it just like you're done?
You're gonna be fine.
Okay,
you're gonna be fine.
But again, I mean, like if you said, "Hey, look, like there was a time 8 months ago that I screwed up."
No, then what the polygrapher would do is say, then what you don't want to do is sit for this polygraph because you are not in compliance with the applicant drug policy. Why don't we reach out for your applicant coordinator and you come back in 4 months after the year's up.
Okay.
Right. But there's also a pre-interview before you actually like bother the polygrapher and have him like schlep his equipment into a conference room. And so you're interviewed at some point, and I think during the actual written application, they'll say, "What was the last time you used marijuana?" And you just be honest, and and they won't let you. They're not going to put you in force. There's no upside for the FBI, who at that point has already invested a ton of money flying you to Cleveland and all that to bounce you. They want you to pass.
Yeah. So they're just be as honest as you can.
Yeah,
and
be honest and don't never walk into a polygraph thinking you're going to game the system. Just especially with the drug policy, just wait.
Yeah. And also it's one of those things again too, where it's like, man, if you're applying for this job and this is the job you want, if you couldn't kick the weed for a year, is it really the job you want? It's like,
and even if you are super clever and are able to like beat the polygraph on that, I promise you that your stoner friends are going to tell on you during the background investigation, which is the next step.
So let's get to that next step, because that's a good point. Because I've had experience with this too, where they just bang on the door and they're like, "Hey," and you're like, "I don't know the person that well."
Yeah.
So next step, you pass through the polygraph.
Yeah, I'm a little fuzzy on what I think the next step is. Actually, they send you to a doctor's office to make sure you're physically able to be an FBI agent. That you're not going to have a massive heart attack the first time you're called upon to run around the track at the academy, and so that you're not don't have some terminal disease, and it's a pretty good medical screening. But once you pass that, then I think you're in the background check phase, and so that's when the FBI sends agents out on the street to investigate you and to verify the authenticity of the jobs that you've claimed you had, and to understand better what your character is and find out, is there a drug problem here? Is there a gambling problem here? Are there vices that are going to screw them up? Is this person, do they spend money wisely, or are they spending money like a drunken sailor? And because again, if you're doing things like spending money poorly and running up credit card debt and not paying your bills, then you become more susceptible to accepting bribes. And so the FBI is not like some rich man's agency, but we want to make sure people are behaving financially responsibly. And so that's one of the factors they're looking at in this background investigation. And it's weird, right? You're the applicant, you're sitting home, you're going to your accounting firm, and you're getting a call every couple of days from somebody saying like, "Hey, the FBI just came to my house asking questions about you. They say you're applying for a position of trust with the U.S. government. Is everything okay?" And so you say, yeah, I'm applying to be an agent. And this is the background check.
So you don't know who they're going to go talk to. They can go talk to.
You're providing them a list of names and references and leads and historic jobs in your current job. But they also need to develop their own leads.
So I was going to say, because I mean, if you have somebody that maybe has a little bit of some skeletons in the closet, they're not going to include everything. So is there a team that will, when they're kind of building this, they'll look through all the main stuff?
Let's say you lived with a girlfriend, because they talked to all your former roommates. And you lived with this girlfriend for a year, and it ended really, really badly with her. And you're the applicant. You are terrified that your girlfriend's going to absolutely submarine you on this. And the FBI is going to talk to her, and she may talk about how you're the worst boyfriend in the world, but we're not hiring you to be a boyfriend, right? There's very specific things the FBI are looking into. Was Reed using drugs? Does Reed abuse prescription medications? Is Reed, is he a thief? Do you know of him committing any major crimes? And she'd be like, no, he was just insensitive. We don't really care.
I've had that before too.
We're not the boyfriend police.
Yeah,
right?
like insensitive. We'll send him to the CIA.
I'll send a limo, bring him to Quantico. So I think people get themselves wrapped around the axle about people in their lives who are going to say bad things about them. But the FBI really drills down when someone's talking negatively about an applicant to try to understand, are these issues that we care about? Or are these just interpersonal conflicts?
Mm-hmm. So how often is there attrition? Like, what's the attrition rate with that? Because I feel like
that's a good question. I've never heard the number, but for the most part, people are passing that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's no real issues there unless we find something about like something that's just not obviously covered. Like, this guy was using a lot of Vicodin improperly a few years ago or something like that. And so I just don't know. I don't have a number for you. It's some number above zero, but it's not 50%. Like every other step of the application process, we're like lopping half the people off.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think before they send you to Quantico, you got to do one more physical fitness test to make sure you haven't just been eating Cheetos between that first physical fitness test and the second physical fitness test.
You're partying with the boys. You're like, I'm
done.
Still got to run a mile.
I've worked out for my last time. Yeah.
So what did you have any like particular standouts with them just popping on, a neighbor's door or anything? Or was it pretty easy?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. What kind of sucked was the last interview they do is to speak to your current employer. And my current employer was KPMG in Chicago. And my current employer was great. They said nice things about me. But then afterwards they said, hey, listen, there was a window of time where I wasn't super billable. a few weeks after the background check was done. They said, listen, we know you're going to the FBI. It doesn't make sense for us to pay you to sit at your desk waiting for the next client to come in. And they ended up telling me that they were going to can me. And so they, and I mean, they were nice about it. And I understand that they're not, they don't support freeloaders, and I wasn't billable. And so what happened was I called my FBI recruiter and I said, hey, listen, I'm getting canned.
Give me the job.
They already had given me the offer, but I was like in the pipeline waiting for a seat at Quantico. And so I think they moved me up a little bit. And so I got to go to Quantico a month before I would have otherwise. So I wasn't eating wet newspaper.
Yeah, I was going to say that would be just the worst if you're like applying and they can't.
Yeah, you get a job with a temp agency or something. I wasn't going to starve to death.
I feel like too, they probably would appreciate it and like have brought you back still because you're not leaving them to go to Deloitte or.
Even if you do, the big firms, as you know, they want to keep their alumni happy because they want you to hire them when you become the CFO of Cisco or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so we're heading to Quantico.
So go to Quantico.
How does that going? What's the feeling going into? Because now you got the job, but now you're going to the training.
You got the job provisionally, right? Like you fail out of Quantico.
True.
I was just gonna like drop out of society and go to Club Med in the Caribbean and be a waiter and just everyone would just assume, right? Big going away party for me. Your girlfriend says she'll follow you and all that. But you get there, you're day one. It's like mixture between law school and boot camp. You're running around. You don't want to be late. You're wearing a little uniform. And you meet the other 50 people in your class, and they're all super impressive, and maybe you're feeling not as impressive. And
do you feel like that's when that imposter syndrome could have really kicked in?
Yeah, I think so. For me, it was youth, right? I was the youngest in my class. I was probably the youngest agent in America for a while, and because the average age is like 29 or 30, and I was like newly 25. And but everybody was cool. It was nice. I mean, everybody's in the same boat. They want the job. We had a lot of personalities. You get the military guys who are all like ha ha ha. You got the lawyers who are all very kind of erudite and all that. And then you had the accountants like me. And so it was a good class of people. They weren't like my closest friends in the world, but and everyone's learning new stuff, right? And for me, I'd never really shot a gun before. So firearms was a big challenge for me. And I wasn't a great shot. To this day, I'm not a fantastic marksman. And you got to be hitting 80% if you're going to kind of graduate, or else you get bad things happen. And
so that's for every group too?
Yeah.
Really?
And so, so the gun stuff was my big thing. The physical fitness was nothing because I had kind of whipped myself into really good shape and I was young. But, there was a 35-year-old guy in my class who, he was a little overweight and he passed the physical fitness test, but the workouts, they would take us out and run us in just these intense workouts, and he was just beaten and battered from that. Then you had the guy who maybe he wasn't the best student in our class. He was a Oklahoma state trooper, and so the academics were really hard for him. He just hadn't studied in a long time, and it had been a while since he was in college. He was a storied state trooper, this amazing law enforcement officer. My point, Reed, is that there's a challenge that everybody needs to get across. And it's different based on what you're doing. Like I was very good with the academics and the physical fitness. I was a terrible shot. Other people had been shooting since they were kids, and they were hitting bullseyes left and right. And so everyone has their stressor there. And for me, firearms was my stressor.
So let me understand the academic portion of it. Obviously, there's only certain detail you can go into.
Yeah, I can talk about that. There's no secrets there.
Okay. So is it, what is the academic surrounding? Is it mostly focused on law, or is it like, because I know if you go to the academies, for example, if you're going to Air Force, you're going, you take a route, and then, you might have to do physics and then like all these different applications for your possible career after. Is everyone taking the same thing?
So every FBI trainee in your class, which is usually about 50 people, is taking exactly the same classes at exactly the same time. There's no special classes for the accountants versus the military guys versus the ex-cops. Everyone's going through the exact same academy, learning the same things. It's very uniform, and that's by design. They want us all coming out with the exact same knowledge. And so there was, white collar crime classes. There was a lot of law, a ton of law, and realized how little I knew about kind of the criminal justice system and how it worked and the different ways to charge people and kind of the trajectory. You have your communication classes, right, where you're learning interview and interrogation. You go outside for your firearms. There's the physical fitness, and then which is tied into the defensive tactics, where you're learning how to fight and how to handcuff people who don't want to be handcuffed. The most interesting thing, and I think with the stuff that you get the most out of, is that there's an entire city in Quantico at the FBI Academy called Hogan's Alley, with like a bank and a trailer park and apartments and a motel. And it's literally a city. There's a residential neighborhood there that people live in, and they bring in actors to be to play, the guy who lives in the trailer park, or the person at the motel lobby, and you're given assignments. You're saying, okay, you and you, 2 kids in the class, all you got to go do is go interview that motel person, the front desk person, to see if that fugitive had checked in. And you go and you interview this actor who's acting like a motel person, and so then you come out and you write your report, and those practical applications get more and more complicated, until you're actually like kicking in the door at a trailer and wrestling someone to the ground.
FBI
Yeah. And so by the time you get out in the field and actually do your first interview or your first arrest, it's not your first, because you've done it dozens and dozens of times in that Quantico, Hogan's Alley town. And you've written up the paperwork, and they try to make it as realistic as possible, so a new agent out of the academy doesn't look like a fool on their first day.
Would you always know as an actor, or was there
No, it was always an actor.
Okay.
Like this isn't a town that anyone lives in. It's a ghost town. It's like a Hollywood movie set, and the actors are great. They're really good at their jobs, and some of them fight you back, and so they're really, really good. And their job is to kind of like hone the steel of these trainees and make them like solid agents.
That's incredible. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that's the most necessary thing too. Cause, we were talking about, I was saying one of the things we did over there was, they put us in a bunch of situations. It was a whole challenge that was, for the entire class, and you had teams, and you have to go through some situations where it'd be like, you were part of, a PE firm that just bought this company. You have to get rid of all the upper management, and they bring in a bunch of alumni, and the alumni would be like, giving you so much shit, getting angry at you. And it's like, you don't ever get that situation unless you actually do it, for most people, until they're in the real world. And I feel like, and obviously that example is like out the window. If you're in the FBI, CIA, like you need to have these type of exercises, because you don't want it to be your first time when you're in the real world.
Right. And, and it's just when you're doing it in the fishbowl with like doing a fake interview while your class is watching you, it's never totally realistic. Right. But when you're doing it when you're knocking on the door of someone's house and they invite you in, you sit on their couch and the TV's blaring and all that, and you're interviewing this actor about something, your heart's racing. I mean, you get into it. It feels real.
So you said that the one thing that you really had to work on was shooting.
Yeah.
What was the approach there? What did you do to kind of improve that?
I did 2 things. One was probably recommended, one was not. Every day after class, I would go to a local shooting range in like the town of Stafford, Virginia. I would rent a gun, like my FBI gun, and buy like 4 boxes of ammunition and just practice shooting. I wouldn't advise that, because I was a crappy shot. And so all I'm really doing is emphasizing my bad habits. The thing that actually works is, one, getting out of your own head, right? Because that was all it was this feedback loop inside my head, not allowing forcing me to jerk the trigger, and so all my clusters of bullets were low and to the left. Dry firing, just getting to know that trigger pull, and allowing the gun to actually fire, and making it a surprise every time, even though it's going to happen. And so, by the end of Quantico, I was shooting in the low 90s, but right up until the test, I was shooting in the like mid 70s, high 70s, which wasn't going to let me pass. And so I was absolutely prepared to be sent home.
Do they push for collaboration around there? Because if you have a guy that was in the SEALs, that's the guy to go to and be like, how do I shoot this?
Trust me, I wasn't the only guy piling in my station wagon and driving to that firing range. There were a lot of people in my class, and some of the people who were in the former military, it's very collaborative. Were coming to try to teach us, because maybe this guy, when he was in the Army, was a firearms instructor there, and now he's the kid sitting next to you in class. And so they were helpful. And but you can tell me 100 times that, okay, just smooth trigger pull, watch your breath, keep your eye on the front sight. And, but it wasn't until, it's just sort of clicked, and it made no sense why it took 10 weeks for it to click, but it did.
It's a weird thing, to be honest, too, because I like shooting as well. And it's with different guns too, So do you guys, I think you said the gun, it was What was the
My
preferred gun?
first weapon was a 9mm SIG Sauer.
okay, that's
My
what
second weapon was a 40 caliber Glock, and then we switched to a 9mm Glock for kind of the last third of my career.
So with the SIG, was that the only weapon you guys were shooting, or did you have to have
No,
competency with
shotgun, and the God, I'm going to screw it up. MP5 submachine gun, machine gun, and the MP5 was later replaced by the M4. I'm not a gun
carbine,
guy.
really?
Yeah. And so I really liked that. I was great with a shotgun, but they're not going to let me put that on my hip to go do bank fraud cases.
You're breaking into
I could hit anything with a shotgun.
and, showing up to Lehman Brothers.
Yeah. And that MP5 was amazing. It had no kick at all. It was like a video game gun. And so I loved that. And then, but you need to be able to carry a pistol.
Yeah, I was going to say it's kind of the go-to. So did you ever have to help anybody on the team, maybe some of the jarheads that were there and, that are maybe not as best with the academics?
We would study like crazy. It's really nice because everyone's trying to lift each other up there. Yeah. And your classroom becomes a team. And in the perfect world, they become your best friends in the world. That didn't really happen with me, but you're helping each other out. For the law test, we would all gather together, and the lawyers would kind of tutor us. For the white collar test, I would do a lot of the tutoring there because there were some kind of financial ish questions, and so we were all doing it together. And I would get up in the morning and run with a bunch of people in my class to keep our running, our fitness up, and you're lifting weights and spotting each other. It's all very collegial.
Yeah, hell yeah. I was going to say that's like huge too, because you think that would be one of the things they'd want to build right there is that
right, because your parents and your girlfriend at home have no idea what you're going through, right? So there's only like 49 other people who understand the pressure cooker you're in, and those are the people in your class.
Yeah, and the team, I mean, you hear that with the SEALs all the time, guys that are going through Hell Week. The only way you get through it is with the guys around you. You're never going to get through it without.
Yeah, and to be clear, I don't even want to compare what I went through with what they went through. Right? I was in this pressure cooker. The guys who were in the military thought this was nothing. They're like, what are you so stressed about? This is just the FBI Academy, and especially the Special Forces guys, and they thought it was all just we were a bunch of candy asses for getting ourselves wrapped around the axle. But for me, it was everything. Like this is all I ever wanted to do. The idea of failing out and going home was just not an option.
When was the moment where you felt like I'm there?
After I passed the firearms test,
that was it.
We're probably 2/3 of the way through it. Once my shooting was fine, I knew that I could sit back and just sort of learn.
What was the feeling there?
It was great. It was like it was triumphant, and I was on your 4th week there, they tell you what city you're going to, right? Because you can go anywhere in America, and I got sent back to Chicago, which was just kind of a fluke.
Do you have any options with that though? Is there like
there's 56 field offices. They have you rank them 1 through 56 from where you'd most like to go to where you least like. Yeah, which is weird, right? Like the top 10 and the bottom 10 are easy, Reed. It's like when you're sitting there scratching your head about whether you would rather go to like Des Moines or Omaha. It's the middle 36 is the bitch, and so I put Chicago number 1 because I had sort of an inside track and knew that Chicago had just had a giant wave of retirements and they were way understaffed. And I got lucky. I got sent back to Chicago. That never happens though. They never send you back to the city from which you came.
Why is that?
I don't know. It's I think they want you to be more beholden to the FBI. They don't want you to necessarily be like hanging with the people, your high school buddies, some of whom may be up to no good type of stuff.
You got a guy
that's always been kind of my conspiracy theory. I never ever got a straight answer about why they were so insistent on sending a kid from like South Carolina to the Bronx or whatever. And so,
sending a New Jersey guy.
Yeah, but I was the exception, right? Chicago just had a huge deficit of agents. And so what happened was all those kids from Chicago who flew to Cleveland with me for the phase 2 interview all put Chicago number 1 because we had heard through the grapevine that Chicago was way down on agents after the hiring freeze, and we all got Chicago, and so those people became kind of my friends.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good to know. You guys had the community there too. So in terms of classification, so you're finishing up there.
Yeah.
Is there similar to maybe what you do? So in military, guys go to sniper school because they're going to be predestined. It's like you're going to be the sniper on the squad, or they might go to med school within the training in the academies while they're coming into the SEAL teams. For FBI, there's NSB, which is the National Security Group, the CCRSB, which is kind of cybersecurity, crime, financial crimes. Is there like a declaration of the major or like where you're going to go, or is it just kind of where they assign you?
Well, depends on your field office, right? The special agent in charge of your city, who you can think of them as like the police chief of Chicago for the FBI, they're allowed to structure their office however they want. And so some offices, like New York, would send new agents to the applicant squad to send them out doing those background investigations on other applicants. And with the idea being that they're going to just get used to get used to the city, which for most people is a strange city, get used to knocking on doors, talking to people, do the paperwork, holding your credentials right side up, all that. Chicago had a much better program. It was a new agent squad where you spent 6 months as basically a farm team for all the other squads. You rotate for like 1 week or 2 weeks through every squad. So you're kind of exposed to everything and kind of seeing which squad you gel with personality wise. You're assigned some kind of dumb little cases, like, bank embezzlement case or a fugitive case to try to catch a fugitive. And so you're working that to try to get used to it. You're very heavily supervised while you're during this probationary period. And so you do something super stupid, you can end up being out of a job. And it was great. I liked it a lot because it kind of exposed me to a lot of stuff. I had done white collar crime investigations for KPMG, but I had never caught a fugitive. I'd never been to a bank robbery, as the first responder. And so I got exposed to a lot of cool stuff.
So what was the moment for that rotation period where you're like, we're in the real deal? The show's starting to get going.
Well, I was assigned some pretty cool cases right off the bat. Like I had a couple embezzlement cases, which I thought were really interesting, and had a fugitive case, which which was fun to actually try to catch a fugitive.
Can you dive into those?
Yeah. The embezzlement case was neat because what happened was an insurance company had $250,000 embezzled from them. Pretty basic embezzlement. The accountant for the insurance company was just writing checks to himself and then covering it up in the financial records, logging in the check log, something other than embezzlement. And then covering it up during the bank reconciliation process. Real basic embezzlement case. That guy's named Johnny. And so I get the case, go talk to the victims, get all the paperwork, get all the documents, kind of going through it all. And I'm kind of gearing up to talk to Johnny, who was fired, right? So he's been fired. He knows he's caught. And then I get called into the office of the organized crime guys, the Chicago Mafia squad. And I go into the supervisor's desk, and these guys were like old agents. It's kind of hard to tell them from the actual mafiosos. Like,
you go in, everything's in black and white, like
smoking cigarettes. I mean, these guys, they care nothing about federal building rules. They close the door and they're like, "We got an issue, Tom. This guy Johnny that you're investigating, he's a target of ours." I go, "Get out of here! You're kidding me!" And it turned out Johnny was a bookmaker for the Chicago mob, and in addition to taking bets from other people on sports betting. And what he was doing was he had fake bettors that were actually him. So he's placing bets for himself also and losing. He was terrible at picking the games. And so his mob bosses were putting pressure on him to collect from his deadbeat bettors, but his deadbeat bettors were himself.
Holy shit.
Right. And so that ended up being, so Johnny is all over these wiretaps that the Chicago mob squad had with his mob bosses putting pressure on him because, they want their money.
Yeah.
They don't care if it's Johnny. They don't care if Johnny has to break someone's legs to get the money, but Johnny's the actual bettor himself. And so the instances of embezzlement I was seeing in my case where he's stealing money from the insurance company where his day job was matched perfectly with the pressure he was getting and the money that he was paying little by little to his mob bosses for his fictitious bettors who weren't paying him.
Holy crap.
Right? So I have this dumb little embezzlement case and it's suddenly getting really escalated. So the mob guys have this, the FBI agents who were on the Mafia squad have this great idea. They're like, here's what we're going to do. We're going to come with you. We're going to bring Johnny in and we're going to try and flip him. And we're going to make him a deal that his embezzlement problems go away if he wears a wire for us and he becomes our informant.
Holy crap.
Again, I'm 25 years old.
Yeah.
I can't tell these guys, well, you stay away from my embezzlement case. I mean, this is for them,
$250,000.
Yeah, for them, this is a big criminal enterprise case. And now they got Johnny by the short hairs, right? And so we did. We brought Johnny in. They allowed me to go at him first. He confesses to the embezzlement. He didn't really put up much of a fight, right? And his name on the checks. And then the mob guys kind of lean into him, and I take a back seat, and they start talking to him about Who do you owe? Who do you know? You know, we know you're this. We know you're taking bets. We know we know that you're the better underneath these things, and you're not just a bookmaker. You're an actual gambler. And they're putting, and Johnny's copping to all this. He's saying, yeah. And so they pitch him at that point. They go, listen, you're looking at 2-3 years in prison on this embezzlement thing that Tom here is investigating. You know, we can really minimize the damage that this is going to cause to you and your family and your 2 little kids if you work for us. And basically, what does that entail? We want you to tell us about these guys. We want you to wear a wire. We want you to make consensually monitored phone calls. We want you to, in basically telling them what an FBI informant would do once they're injected into the mob. And this guy's already in, so he's a perfect guy. So Johnny wants to think about it. A couple weeks, like a week. I don't blame him. Yeah, he's like, I need to think about it. And so a week goes by, and he reaches out for I don't know if it was me or one of the other agents, and basically says, not interested. I'm just going to take my lumps for the embezzlement. I mean, he made the calculation that it was probably going to be more dangerous for him to cooperate, because he'd be called upon to testify, than it would be to take his lumps for the embezzlement. And so, he went away for 2 years in my case, and so that kept happening to me. I was like the Forrest Gump of like the financial crime program, because
just I would walking into the crazy.
I'd have these really benign, like kind of normal cases, and they would spin up into some like crazy, weird situation, and then I'd be thrust into the world of kind of violent crime and organized crime and counterterrorism and stuff like that.
So let me ask: so how often is there that direct connection for? Because I feel like, especially with gangs, mafias, whatever it might be, like the RICO charge is what gets them, and you'll hear that you have. This happens with rappers a lot. I don't know if you've had been asked about that previously, where it's like rappers, their lyrics getting used in court, and like the takedowns of, Young Thug, all these rappers, whatever it might be. It's usually a RICO case, and it's usually like they'll find embezzlement or, flipping the books or whatever. And that'll be the case that sparks the RICO. So how often are you guys kind of having that cross coordination, and how important are you to, like, how often do you see those RICO cases development, or especially in like Chicago?
I only worked one RICO case, and so I'm certainly not an expert on that statute. I know that the hurdles that the government needs to jump through are way higher for a RICO case, because it's just such a powerful investigative tool. But I'll tell you that conceptually, the FBI separates us into these little squads, right? I'm on the bank fraud squad. This guy's on the investment fraud squad. This guy's on the crimes against children squad. This guy's on the bank robbery squad. This guy's on the black gang squad. This guy's on the Latin gang squad. Here's the thing, though, Reed. The criminals don't care about those designations, right? So I had plenty of gangster disciples who were doing check fraud. I had Johnny the mafioso doing a corporate embezzlement, and so the bad guys they're cross-programmed, even though we weren't. So you end up coordinating a lot with other agents from other squads.
And you were in Chicago at a time when it was like pretty hot too.
It was great, man. I mean, Chicago was such a wonderful city in the 90s and the 2000s to be an agent, because there was just so much crime. We had we put 2 back-to-back governors in prison.
Yeah, so, I'm gonna mispronounce
and we'll get there. But my point is, you had the gangster disciples. You had the Latin, which is the home of the gangster disciple gang, right? It's where Larry Hoover came from.
Can you explain who Larry Hoover is?
Larry Hoover was a gang leader from the late 1960s who formed a gang called the Gangster Disciples, and they're probably the major cause of like instability in the black community in Chicago, because they were a really, really bad, really, really violent drug gang, and he ended up going to prison for kind of being the boss man of that gang, and he's going to die in prison.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the ramifications are still there, because the rappers I was talking about, like they all are GD, I can't be saying that, but like GDs or whatever. Yeah. It's crazy still hearing it, because they all speak about that time. Like Chicago was hot.
It was hot, and it was a bloodbath too. I mean, and then you had the Latin Kings, the kind of Latino version of all that, and you had there were other smaller gangs. The FBI over time and the Chicago police have done a number on those big gangs, and it's almost made it worse in some ways. So now, instead of like having a standing army of thousands of young unemployed guys in the ghetto, now you have dozens of tiny little gangs, each controlling their own corner and shooting each other a lot. Yeah. So I think the violent crime, the actual street level crime, has probably gone up quite a bit as a result of that. I mean, it's that age-old question. What do you want, organized crime or disorganized crime?
Yeah, that's, I talked to a number of like cartel reporters and stuff, because, what happens down there is just it's unbelievable, and it rarely gets talked about. And there's a very interesting quote by Felix Gallardo, who started the Guadalajara cartel, where he said they caught him, disbanded Guadalajara, and he's like, you let the lions out of the cage without the lion tamer. And he goes, you're going to see what happens next. And it's a crazy question because...
Yeah, the war on drugs has always been this kind of vexing problem, right? And until we're able to... I mean, Colombia doesn't have a drug problem. We're the ones with a drug problem because we have this massive demand.
Yeah.
And so, I have no solution other than the idea that as long as there's a demand out there for illegal drugs, there's going to be some moron out there willing to supply it.
So you're talking about your first manhunt case as well. So you go from this embezzlement that turns out to be way more than you were thinking it was going to be. Yeah. What goes on with this first manhunt case in the first?
Okay, so I had a, God, this is such a long story to tell, but I'll try and truncate it because I don't want to bore your listeners. I've told this on other shows.
Oh, no, go as long as you need. Don't worry.
All right, so as a new agent, like I said, you're on this new agent squad, and they assign you these crappy old dog cases, usually reassigned from several other agents. And I was assigned this case to catch a fugitive by the name of Gilberto Granados Lopez. He had extorted money from a children's charity in Chicago, gone to trial and lost, and then he became a fugitive thereafter, after he was found guilty. In the federal system, they don't generally throw you in prison unless you're considered to be a danger to the community or a flight risk. You go home and await your sentencing, and then you go to prison. Okay?
Really?
Yeah. So you're found guilty, and we say, okay, Reed, go home, and we'll be in touch in a few weeks for your sentencing, and you go home. And most people show up to their sentencing and then face their lumps like a man. Mm-hmm. This guy dipped; he was just gone, and that happened like when I was in high school. This guy had been gone for a long time, and so I, I was an accountant, right? I'd never caught a fugitive before, and I didn't really care about his underlying crime. So I had this old dusty case file from back when I was in like 1988 or 1989. I remember bringing it to a deputy U.S. Marshal who was on our fugitive task force, and I asked him. I said, I have this fugitive case, and I'm a new agent, and I don't really know what to do. Can you give me some tips? And he give me that. He takes it, and starts leafing through it, and he's like, all right, here. This guy's Mexican. He's from Mexico. He's probably gone back to Mexico. There's no way that Mexico is going to extradite him to the U.S. for this crime. And so what I would do is go back to your desk, read a comic book or something, and then maybe down the road they'll assign you a better case because this case is going nowhere. I was like, all right, thank you. And I walk away. And so it became clear to me that the FBI had assigned me this case, not because they really thought or even gave a damn if I would catch him, but because they wanted me to go through the motions of conducting an investigation, of knocking on doors, talking to people, writing up the interview reports. And so that's what I did. So I start doing all my work on this case, and I find that the fugitive is this interesting guy. Back in like the 50s and 60s, he was the tango king of Chicago. This guy was the best tango dancer ever that Chicago had ever seen. And then his life kind of went sideways, and he became a criminal and all that. Yeah. And
as tango dancers tend to do.
That's right. So there's kind of this interesting factoid. I'm talking to these people who like knew him back in the day when he was a dancer and all that, and I'm writing it up, putting it in my. None of which is getting me closer to actually catching him. And so one thing I find out, which was kind of interesting, is that he was still receiving a Social Security direct deposit into his bank account every month. Turns out fugitives, Reed, are allowed, at least back then, were allowed and eligible to receive Social Security. But if I caught him and put him in prison, then he would no longer be eligible, right? So I thought this was a fantastic lead. So
wait, fugitives were able to get Social Security?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't write the law, but to me it was this fantastic lead because I knew what bank, because he banked at this bank in like the Latino neighborhood, the Mexican American neighborhood in Chicago. So I went to the bank, talked to the bank manager, and gave him my card and all that. And he said, well, I can't really tell you much about the guy's account, but basically he told me the money is just sitting there accumulating. He gets, and he hasn't touched it in years. But the money just continues to accumulate in the bank account, and it's gotten up to a pretty good balance, but he's not drawing upon it. So I give him my business card. I'm like, hey man, if this guy comes into the bank to get the money, you stall him and you call me, and I'm going to drive, and I'm going to show up, and I have my FBI jacket on. I'm going to say, get on the ground, FBI, and I'm going to arrest him. And he's like, yeah, I'll call you. So that went nowhere. And so I continue talking to people in the Chicago tango community. And then one day, Reed, I get this letter in the mail. I know you're a young guy. A letter is what they had before emails. They would put paper in an envelope. You put like a sticker on it. It cost 25 cents. They would bring it anywhere.
Still use them. They're good. Yeah.
All right. So I got a letter. And inside the letter was a photocopy of the letters to the editor page, a single piece of papers, no return address, no nothing, a letters to editor from a magazine called Dancing USA Magazine. And it was just interesting. And so I read the letter to the editor, and it was interesting because it was a letter to the editor from Gilberto Granados Lopez to a magazine called Dancing USA Magazine, complaining about the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, this old venue there that had been like dilapidated and was being used for rock and roll shows. Now, I knew the Aragon Ballroom because I had just seen the Beastie Boys there a couple of days before. And it was going on and on about how when I was the tango king of Chicago, the Aragon Ballroom was the place to see and be seen, but now it's fallen into disrepair and they're having rock shows there. Signed Gilberto Granados Lopez. And so I'm like, wow, and the letter was from like 6 weeks earlier, 8 weeks earlier.
And you had no idea where the letter was from. It was just from
I don't know who
anonymous.
sent me this tip. It had to be someone from that tango, from the tango world.
Yeah.
So now I got some interesting leads. Play detective with me. What do you do?
You're going to go to that ballroom.
Not the ballroom. The ballroom's this is a letter to the editor of a magazine talking about
this. Have to go to. I mean, you can go to that magazine and see where that original.
Right. So it's 1995.
They don't have any traction on.
It's 1995. The AOL dial-up was the internet. There's no websites to go to.
Everything had to be.
So here's what I thought about it for a second. I thought, okay, well, Dancing USA Magazine. I need to find out what the deal is. I'd never heard of this magazine. This isn't a magazine I'm going to get off the shelves at Walgreens, which means what? That this guy is
a subscriber.
A subscriber. Bingo. And so now I got to find the magazine. And so I get on the phone and I start calling around to different dance studios in Chicago. And I would like Arthur Murray Dance Studios. I'd say, hey, this is kind of a weird question. My name's Tom. I'm with the FBI. Do you subscribe to Dancing USA Magazine? And I finally found a dance studio on Lincoln Avenue. They say, yeah, we got a bunch of copies just kind of sitting in the waiting room. I go, would you do me a favor and go grab a copy? Guy grabs a copy, comes back to the phone, and I go, okay, I want you to look at the first couple pages. You're going to see the masthead, where it lists like the editor, the assistant editor. And down below, it's going to give you the where it's published. And it was published in, I think it was St. Louis, Missouri. All right, thank you very much. And so then I get on the phone. And back in the day, again, there's no. I need to get the number for Dancing USA Magazine. It wasn't in the masthead. You could call the area code for St. Louis, Missouri, 555-1212, and it would give you the local directory assistance operator for St. Louis. And I go, can I get the number for Dancing USA Magazine? They give it to me. Now I got the number for the magazine. I cold call the magazine. I say, this is going to sound crazy, but my name's Tom Simon. I'm an FBI agent in Chicago. I have reason to believe that a fugitive I'm hunting is a subscriber of your magazine. Would you be willing to look in your subscriber records and tell me if he's a subscriber and give me his address? These were simpler times.
Yeah.
They did it.
Just right off, they didn't even question.
They didn't question me. I could, this is, again, this is 1995, a simpler era.
Yeah.
Looks it up, gives me the address, his name and address, Mexicali, Mexico.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
I'm out of luck. I'm right back where I started from because Mexico's not going to extradite him. So I fall into this depression. And so I come up with a plan. It's like a Hail Mary plan. I send a letter. I create a fake letterhead. Now, let me explain something first. Before cell phones, and this is before cell phones, we would have these phones, these hardwired phones in our squads, and they were called the hello phone. They were used for kind of light undercover operations. If that phone rang, whatever agent's around is just supposed to say hello and then kind of see where it goes. So I create this fake letterhead for the Fletcher group. And the idea was, it wasn't the Fletcher group, it was the Peters group. I'm sorry. And I was Tom Peters from the Peters group, created a letterhead. And I wrote a letter, dear Gilberto Granados Lopez, my name is Tom Peters. I'm a television producer for the Peters group. Maybe you've heard of us. We are in the process right now. We've been hired by PBS, the public broadcasting system in the U.S., to produce a series of documentaries on America's greatest ballrooms.
Oh my God.
We are aware of your history as the Tango King of Chicago and your history with the Aragon Ballroom. We would like to fly you, all expenses paid, to Chicago to be interviewed at the Aragon Ballroom by famous actor and tango dancer Robert Duvall. Now, Reed, did you know that Robert Duvall was a tango dancer?
I did not.
You know who probably did? Gilberto Granados Lopez.
Yep.
please contact me as soon as you can if you are interested in taking part of this. We'd like to fly you out and interview. We really hope that you can help us recapture the glory of the Aragon Ballroom.
Oh my God.
Signed Tom Peters. Folded up, international stamp, put it in the mailbox, and sat and waited. 2 weeks later, I'm sitting at my desk doing some paperwork. That hello phone rings. Like, I was the only one who had used that hello phone in a while. I answer the phone. Hello? It's him. It's Gilberto Granados Lopez. And he is so excited to be a part of this TV show. He cannot wait. He's going to recapture his glory. It's going to be fantastic. He wants to be a part of it. I go get permission to get some funds and buy him a round trip ticket from Mexico to Chicago. And knowing that he would probably only be using one way if this worked. And, and he keeps calling back. You want me to bring memorabilia? I'm like, yeah, bring memorabilia. Bring it all. Yeah. Bring it all, man. And so
you're going to want to remember this trip. Trust me.
Exactly. So I send him, I mail him. It's a long time ago. This is when plane tickets were hard copies. Send him the round trip plane tickets to Mexico. I mean, he could have cashed them in and burned me for the ticket. And he didn't. And so smash cut to like December, I'm standing there at the pre 9/11, right? So I'm standing there at the end of the jetway with a little sign in my hand that says Gilberto Granados Lopez, waiting for him to kind of get off the plane. Everyone's getting off the plane and none of them are Gilberto Granados Lopez. And then like the cleaning crew is getting on, some of the flight crew is getting off. I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to be so embarrassed.
Yeah, you burned me.
And then I see coming down, it's Gilberto Granados Lopez. He's the last guy off the plane, way older, right, than the pictures I have. But it's him. He sees my sign with his name on it. His eyes light up. He shuffles over to me. I say, Mr. Lopez? He goes, Mr. Peters? He puts his hand in my hand. I take his hand, put it behind his back, put the cuffs on him, and brought him in.
That's a perfect way to do it. I thought you were going to like wait for a little bit and bring it back in the car. But that's just like handshake.
That was the craziest thing. Okay, so 2 epilogues. So bring him back. I can give you a photo of he and I together.
Yeah,
and,
please do.
Yeah.
I'm going to use that for
thumbnail
probably.
And he asked if it's okay for us to swing by the Aragon Ballroom to tell us that he can't be in the show. I said, well, I'll let them know.
Don't worry, I got connections there.
And fingerprint him, photograph him. He gets sentenced to like 8 years in prison.
Mm.
And
what was his original?
He was extorting money from a children's charity that was serving the Mexican American community, making threats against them. So bad guy. Let's stipulate that I'm the good guy in the story and he's the bad guy, because every time I tell the story, there's always someone in the audience who feels really sorry for him.
I don't know how you could if there's a different extorting. We'll get to this later where I was talking about the crowd that gets extorted the most is people like my age and like if you're extorting a children's. Come on.
Yeah, bad guy.
Yeah.
So here's the real epilogue to the story. Time marches on. 9/11 happens. My voice deepens. I become a man in the FBI. 2003 or so, I'm sitting at my desk on a counterterrorism squad and my phone rings. Agent Simon, can I help you? And it's this voice on the other end of the phone going, he's here. He's here. I said, I'm sorry, who's here? What are you talking about?
God.
It was the banker.
Yeah.
Gilberto Granados Lopez had gotten out of prison and gone to the bank to get his Social Security money. I had never told the banker that I had caught him and he had paid his debt to society. He thought he had kept my card for 8 years waiting for Gilberto Granados Lopez to come into the bank to get his money so I could arrest him. He had no idea that I had already done so. And so I go, oh my God, no, I guess he's out of prison now. Please tell him I said hi. Give him his money. Thank you so much for your cooperation.
Did you imagine the bit like Lopez gets there and he's like, all right, I'm just gonna pull out my money, start my new life. And then this banker's like giving him all this paperwork. It's like we're
stalling.
Yeah. He's like, I've been here for
It's
4
exactly
hours.
right,
Can I just leave?
Yeah. All I want's the money, man. It's been a rough 8 years.
Yeah.
So that's the Tango King story.
That's so crazy. Do you know why he was waiting on the plane for that long? Like, did he?
I think he was just sitting in the back. Maybe he had to take a dump. I don't know.
Just hanging out.
I mean, it was weird. I remember how dejected I was because I almost folded up my little tent and left. But and he was an older guy, and so he's just not as spry as young dudes like you.
He had no suspicion. He was just like, we're good to go.
He thought he was. It's ego, man.
Yeah.
Right. I played to his ego.
So, what was everyone's reaction when you came in and you're like, I caught the guy?
Everybody's amazed. It was such a fun story to tell.
Yeah.
And I've been kind of beating this drum for 30 years, telling the story to anyone who's willing to listen, because it's such a fun story.
Yeah, it's crazy. What was, I mean, you have the senior officers around you. You had the one that looks at this case and is like, that's going nowhere.
Well, you know, that's the thing with the FBI is you don't spend a ton of time jerking each other off. What happens is you move to the next case.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it was great. Got some backslaps. I'm like, wow, that's a crazy story. You'll be telling that for the rest of your life. And they're right. But then by that point, you know, I had been assigned other cases and you move on to the next case. Being an FBI, just like being a pie eating contest, right? You finish one pie, they're just going to shove another pie in front of you. There's more crime and more cases than the FBI will ever have the resources to work. And so you don't spend a ton of time like, you know, retiring your jersey like you're Michael Jordan.
Yeah. So there's like a level of delayed gratification where it's just kind of like, hey, man, good job.
Yeah.
When you retire, we'll talk about it.
And a good agent is not going to like make a big deal out of it and spend a lot of time self-aggrandizing. They're going to move on to the next case and understand that their reward is they took an oath of office to do this and you get paid every 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Which also helps. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more cases to cover, especially there. I know we got Governor Blagojevich. Man, I wrote it down. I still couldn't pronounce it. We'll get to him in a second, just because that case is incredible. It's representative too of just what happens in government and stuff. But I guess in general, you know, we're talking about Chicago being pretty hot and stuff. Was there a moment as well where, whether it was a case that you were specifically working on, a case that you heard of, where, you know, at that time too, you had some, what's his name? The serial killer that was operating in the area, the clown.
John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah, he was like in that area. You know, there's just a lot of brutal stuff that happens in crime. It's just what it is. Was there either a case you worked on or a case that you knew someone was working on where that aspect of the job kind of hit you as well?
Like a serial killer case?
Not even serial killer, just that, because there is always a difference between financial crime and physical crime. And I guess like it's one of those things you might not think about until you really have to operate on a case around that.
Yeah.
So was there a moment there as well?
I mean, there were cases that you think of cases where everyone drops everything and kind of pitches in. And so I wasn't the case agent on anything that big in Chicago, but we had a case where a judge, she comes home one evening late from work and her entire family had been slaughtered. Like I guess it was just her husband had been like just slaughtered in the home. And it was this huge mystery, like who would kill this judge's husband, who's just sort of this benign, he was a lawyer also, but there's no reason why anyone would want to kill him. And so at the time, this judge had really pissed off like this white power leader by putting him in jail. And so he had all these people in the white power movement, like threatening her, like her life. And so, you know, everybody drops everything to work this case of this federal judge whose husband was murdered. And it turned in, you know, we're working with the police and with the U.S. Marshal Service. And I was a small cog in this very big engine, just running down kind of ground ball leads in this case. And eventually it turned out that it was some other guy who she had ruled against in a civil suit like a year and a half earlier, who went to her house to kill her because he was so bent out of shape about this, you know, the civil suit that he lost. It had nothing to do with the white power. We're dragging these white power guys in, interrogating them, and they're all like, I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. And so, so there's cases like that, or the 9/11 attacks, or, you know, or a child kidnapping here and there, where you set everything aside and just run down leads because there's nothing more important than that. And that was always sort of it was interesting to me from an academic perspective, because you get to see how the FBI truly works when they're kind of in their crisis model, where something big has happened and we need to solve this. And you also get to kind of walk away from your own cases and take a break.
Can you dive into that a little bit more? So 9/11 is a great example. Yeah. I'm sure there's plenty of others. What does crisis mode look like?
Okay, so 9/11 happens. It was a Tuesday morning, 9:30 in the morning. You know, I was at my office waiting for a friend of mine to get in because we were going to go interrogate the subject of one of my dumb little bank fraud cases. And then my friend, who's like coming in late for some reason, calls me and says, "Dude, are you watching TV?" I'm like, "What?" And he goes, "A plane just flew into the World Trade Center." I was like, "You're kidding me!" Like in my mind, I pictured like a little Cessna plane, like hitting the building.
In the late 90s too.
Yeah, planes fly into buildings every now and then. And he's like, "No, this is something big." And so run down to the conference room and I holler at some of the other agents, hey guys, a plane just flew into a building in New York, and we like turn on like the Today Show or something like that. And so we're watching live as the second plane flies into the second World Trade Center. And an older agent on my squad who saw it coming said, guys, we're not going to be doing anything other than this for a long time. He goes, we're all terrorism agents now. And I was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'm not on the terrorism squad. And he's like, just watch. And he's right. I mean, we're looking out the window at the Sears Tower right there outside of our building, waiting to see if it's going to happen there. And then we hear about the Pentagon. Then we hear about the plane forced to the ground in Pennsylvania. And so, this is scary, right? Like, America's under attack. We are the FBI. It's our job to figure out what happened, who's doing this, and make sure that these planes stop flying into buildings. And then what they did was they took the white collar crime squads and they said, go home and get some sleep. You guys are on you guys are on 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. shift. We're working 12-hour shifts you're not going to be any good to us if you stay awake. And so they took all the violent crime and counterterrorism guys and got them working. And then I had to go home and get some sleep. Of course, I didn't get any sleep. I was glued to the television like everyone else in America. And then I came in at 10 o'clock that night, and we had a command post set up by the time I got in. And agents would literally stand in line, snaking down the hallway as leads would come in, and they would hand leads to you. Go talk. Find Muhammad, interview him, see what he knows about this. He was, one of the hijackers, skyjackers, had placed a call to him, 6 months ago or whatever, when he was in flight school in Florida. Okay, and then you go, and all that. So you're just standing in line working leads, and you get back from your lead. Maybe it's 2 a.m, 3 a.m, because I was working nights, and you're getting these poor people out of bed to interview them. Most of them knew nothing. And you write it up, you get it in there, they review it, they make edits, they make changes, then you get back in line for the next lead. And so that went on I feel like it went on for 2-3 weeks thereafter. And what happened for me was that they really liked my paperwork and they really liked my interview abilities. And, I was a nobody, making big numbers, putting up big numbers on the...
Catching the Tango King.
Catching the Tango King, but more importantly to them, putting up really big numbers very quietly on the bank fraud squad, just putting away just buses and buses of people, because I got really good at cycling through bank fraud cases over the course of that 6 years. And so eventually I get pulled into a big boss's office, and they said, we're forming a team together. We want like a financial crime guy on the team. We want an organized crime guy on the team, violent crime, counterterrorism, and maybe a couple counterterrorism guys. And there were some charities in Chicago that were ostensibly taking money from good Muslims for the poor and needy of the Muslim world that were funneling money to Al Qaeda and other criminal groups. They wanted us to dismantle those charities, take their assets, and put as many people in prison who were involved with this charity as possible. And they made a team out of us. They created a squad from whole cloth, and I was like the financial nerd on the team. And so that changed my whole career, because I literally just walked away from bank fraud and became a counterterrorism agent literally overnight.
What was you highlighted it was 3 weeks of nonstop work.
Yeah.
Would you say that was the longest 3 weeks or the fastest, where it's just...
It was gratifying because I got to kind of see the FBI at our best and see people like kind of really, rising above. And the teamwork was amazing because you didn't really know who you'd be partnered up with on any given night, because they had us going out in pairs. So I got to work with a lot of agents that I didn't really know that well, because you're sort of pigeonholed in your squad. I hate to call it fun because it was such a scary and terrible time for America, but professionally it was incredibly gratifying.
Yeah.
And again, front seat to history, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like, of course, fun isn't the right. It's like exciting, where it's like, you hear this with, I had Stephen Montero on, he was actually at Ground Zero, a Secret Service agent, and he was right downtown there. And, he said, obviously, it was one of the hardest times in his life, but at the same time, there's that level of where you're saying you see everyone kicking the gear. And people always highlight, and I was too young to remember this, but 9/12, where they're saying like to see Americans really come together and say like, we need to.
Right. It also showed us as agents the deficiencies within our own agency, right? The FBI, was unable to share information between the criminal squads and the intelligence squads. Like they would have these FISA wiretaps up, right? The national security wiretaps. But it was illegal for them to use that in a criminal case, even if the the guy suspected of terrorism was committing crimes because it was national security wiretaps coming from the national security courts. And so what the Patriot Act did, which was commonly, really people tore it apart because it had some
people
stuff that
freak out about
people
that,
didn't like it, but it dropped those walls down, and it created a process by which the criminal squads could actually share information and vice versa with the national security squads, which ultimately made America safer. And so it was interesting to kind of see the FBI get reinvented and see the counterterrorism program really get like beefed up and muscular with them kind of hand selecting agents from the other squads, the criminal squads who had success in the criminal area, and putting them on counterterrorism squads and allowing them to kind of bring their talents to the war on terror.
What a crazy episode. I hope you guys did enjoy this first part with Tom. And just a reminder that part 2 is coming out on Sunday. So if you guys do want to tune into that, make sure to subscribe. And with that, I'll see you in the next one.